Well, welcome everybody to July's podcast, and we are doing this podcast. It's going to be all about peat. We're actually recording at Falshaw Moss on the most horrific morning. Having been 30 degrees over the weekend, it's now 14 degrees and driving rain. But we're hunkered down in the bird watching hide by the bird feeders. We couldn't even go to the Osprey platform because the wind was just so awful out there. So here we are in the height of summer in rainy Cumbria, and I'm joined today by Susie Webb, who is our head of the peat team.
Hello everyone.
We're going to do all about peat, upland peat and lowland peat. So Susie, give us a flavour of why is peat so important? Well, what is it and why is it so important?
Right, so peat forms when in very waterlogged conditions and slightly acidic conditions, plants don't decompose. So instead of decomposing and releasing all their carbon that they've captured throughout their life back into the atmosphere, instead it gets squashed down and turns into peat. And over years, this builds up into being the thick layers of peat that we know. But because it captures that carbon, they're hugely important for climate change because they hold that carbon in, and a healthy peat bog will lock it away. They're also hugely important for flooding because obviously they're waterlogged and they hold a lot of water, and especially upland peatlands, huge expanses of Cumbria, but also the whole of north of England, our drinking water comes from upland peatlands, and they're really important for filtering that water and making sure it's nice and clean.
And they're incredibly important habitats in their own right, these peatlands.
Yes, amazingly so. There's some really, really unique species that you find on peatlands. Because they're quite harsh environments, the species you find there are really well adapted. And so there's tiny little sundews, which are little carnivorous plants that have sticky leaves, and they, when an insect lands on them, they get stuck to them, and then their leaves curl up and they slowly digest that insect and take all the nutrients.
They don't have a massive diversity of species, but those species are incredibly specialist.
Absolutely, and one of the most specialist is the sphagnum mosses, which are actually called, which are better known as bog mosses.
And they're incredibly important as a historical record as well, aren't they? We've just had the peat cores taken on the peatlands at the back of Skidder, and because nothing breaks down in those anoxic, where there's no oxygen in those conditions, so all those fossils, either the pollen or the microfossils, are all actually kept within the peat stratigraphy, and we can actually find out what's happened in the past.
They're amazing records, and taking peat cores like that, it gives you a really good indication of when the peat started forming and what other plants were around when that peat started forming. You can analyse all the different pollen that's in there, but they also a very good archaeological record of human elements, yeah. Like you can find, well, luckily we've never found one, but bog bodies or things like that.
And in the preliminary findings from Cambridge University that they've been doing at the back of Skidder, we can already tell where we've had human influence on the land with tree clearance. There are fire episodes within that, and these are thousands of years ago. And then water episodes, which shows that there was actually standing water in there, and also changes within the climate as well. Now here at Falshaw, it's particularly special because the bog here, I mean, apart from being absolutely massive, so this is a lowland raised mire, absolutely massive, 3 square kilometres of deep peat, and this is 7 metres deep in the middle, 7 metres of peat. So how long would that have taken, Susie, to form all that peat?
So peat forms on average a millimetre a year. But probably peat was taken off here in the past, which will have reduced that. So it could be up to 10,000 years old, some of that peat right at the base. And yeah, the lowland raised mires that we get around in South Cumbria and also the Solway mosses, they're hugely thick, up to sort of 10, 12 metres in places. And, wow. And obviously that's thousands and thousands of years of peat forming.
Yeah, and thousands of tons of carbon, millions of tons of carbons, yeah. all locked away. And that's the crux, is it not, of this whole peatland restoration idea. Wildlife Trust, we're looking after wildlife and the habitats, but also making sure the peat is wet enough that we're not losing that carbon into the atmosphere, either through oxidation or through it being washed away by water. And all of our peat bogs have been modified to some extent in the past, haven't they?
Yeah, historically, peat was used for fuel, and peat cutting was a big thing, both in the lowlands but also right up in the uplands, like right up on our fell tops. You get signs of peat cutting where there were no trees, so people had no other fuel to use. So that obviously was initially a big issue, but there's also been a history of overgrazing and burning, and in some places such as Falshore, a history of forestry planting on peatlands, which all slowly dries out the peat. And as the water level drops, obviously all that carbon that's been locked away starts to oxidise, like you say, and it washes away, it goes up into the atmosphere, and all that carbon store is lost.
So the main thrust of our intervention here is trying to get water back into the middle of these peat bodies, isn't it? It's trying to restore the hydrology. And that was what we did here at Falshore. Over 25 years of work at Falshore. First of all, like you said, Susie, it was planted up with conifers in the 1950s. So first of all, we had to take all those trees off, block all the drains, reprofile all the edges where we'd had quite extensive peat cutting here. There's still peat cutting sheds here at Falshore Moss, which shows that peat cutting was still going on until very recently. And then blocking all the drains because the whole place was drained to allow it to be dry enough to plant those trees in. And it was only really recently, over the past few years, that it's really dawned on me that this Falshore project and the restoration of this massive great peat body was a massive wilding project, and we turned that moss, and that's the royal we, that's the people who worked for the Nature Reserves Department, mainly John Dunbavin, who got all those trees taken off and got all those diggers on and did all those work over 20 years, and has now created this phenomenal wildlife wilderness area, and we have this brilliant access to it where we are here, where you can go and see the bog. We have the fantastic ospreys. We've got these 2 osprey nests now on Falshore, and it's been incredibly good for the trust in terms of raising our profile, in getting people to join, in getting people to visit. All mires aren't like Falshore moss, are they? They come in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah, so Falshore moss is what we call a lowland raised bog, but up in the fells, on the fell tops, you get blanket bogs, which tend to be shallower peats, but they blanket the fell tops in a big sort of carpet. And up there, we tend to have areas of bare peat, and we have drains cut into it, but also we get what are called hags, which sort of cliff faces of peat. And all of this peat is being washed away. So in our upland peatlands, our sort of main 2 focuses of restoration are improving the hydrology and re-wetting those bogs, but also making sure that bare peat is covered over with vegetation so that it can no longer release carbon.
Right, so Liz, our roving producer, has been out talking to the peatland team, and this is Mel and Grace telling Liz about what the peatland team do on a day-to-day basis.
So yeah, Joe, I've just joined Mel and Grace on a damp July morning, and they're going to show me a little bit about what they do in this huge process of restoration.
Yeah, we're visiting a site called Wasdale Beck, which is quite near Shap, and we're going to be monitoring the hydrology and the vegetation so that we can see what the site is like prior to it being restored, because once the restoration happens, we hope that it will become wetter and be much better for wildlife and carbon and all those lovely things. But initially, we want to see what it's like and how degraded it is and have a good baseline to work from.
So we're going to be hammering in some dip wells. They're basically big plastic tubes with lots of holes in, and we hammer it in and they fill up with water up to where the water table is. And we put in our data loggers, which are very nifty devices, which measure the water table depth. So we can see if after restoration this level rises.
Because at the moment this is quite a degraded site because it's got a lot of drains within it, and we hope that once these drains have been blocked that the peat becomes re-wetted, if you like, and then it makes it the perfect place for lovely bog mosses and sedges to grow and recolonise and turn back to the nice healthy bog that we want. I'm slowly being attacked by horseflies.
Yes.
I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's perfect. You can hear it now filling with water, and if you look down the tube, you can see that the water is basically flush with the ground, so it shows that the water table level is really high here.
Yep.
It's almost to ground level,
Yep. Yep.
which is what we want to see really on
Yep.
the bog. We've chosen a nice wet spot to bash it in.
Good.
then
So how many of those do you have to do in a day?
Well, we're going to put 5 in today.
Are we?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, good.
So then we just need to add the data logger. So you just tie it to a bit of string
Yep.
and then lower it into the tube.
Yep. There it goes.
And then, yeah, we'll come back twice a year. We'll take the data logger out and we'll download all the data and then plop it back in. And it just does its thing.
And now we're going to go. We're going to do the next stage, really, which is the vegetation survey.
Yeah, we're going to do a vegetation quadrat, and that gives us the baseline information, if you like, for the site. So before we do any work on the site, we need to know what condition on all the vegetation that's growing. So it gives us a really good idea of how healthy or unhealthy that peatland is. And then we'll come back on a yearly basis and we'll repeat the vegetation survey in exactly the same spot, and that'll give us an indication on how successful the restoration work is coming along. Because although the restoration works will take place this winter, it takes a long time for the vegetation to re-establish. So we're looking at, well, tens of years.
Oh, really?
Yeah, not probably not my lifetime.
Okay.
Before it's back to a really healthy, functioning bog.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a slow process.
Yeah. Okay. Show me how you're going to do this then, the vegetation survey.
Okay, to create our 10-metre quadrat, we're using a bamboo cane and we're using some string, just because it's very lightweight and easy to get onto site, and a lot of our sites are quite remote with big walks in, so we try to keep all our equipment down to a minimum and make it as lightweight as possible, and also as fairly cheap as possible as well. So we've got 4 bamboo canes, which we're going to put at each corner of the quadrat, and I've got some string that will join it all up together.
And then once you've got your square, you have to work out which plants are actually there already.
Yeah, we've got a kind of like a tick list of what we're looking for, and we have to identify percentages of different plant species. Well, it's quite foggy there, Liz.
Yeah.
So we've just come across a nice patch of sphagnum moss. This is one of the species that we really look for in peatlands as an indicator of, healthy peatlands. We're stood in a very wet area at the moment. Sphagnum mosses tend to grow in really wet areas. They're actually the key peat-forming species within peatlands, so because they hold, I think it's maybe 20 times their weight in water, really slows the level of decomposition because it doesn't allow oxygen into the plants. So this causes peat to grow over a really, really slow period of time, I think maybe 1 millimetre a year. So yeah, sphagnum mosses, they're sort of our champion species in peatlands that we're always looking for.
So we're hoping in years to come there'll be a lot more of us.
Yes, a lot more, and a lot of different species as well. We like to see a lot of diversity in sphagnum mosses. Some are more effective at making peat than others. So yeah, and they're very beautiful. They come in lovely different colours and shapes, and yeah, they're one of my favourite species.
So the first thing on our list is any heather species. The other thing we'll be looking for are dwarf shrubs, purple moorgrass, any other grasses, and also cotton grasses. And then we'll be looking for sedges and rushes and various other things. So we're just going to divide this big 10-metre quadrat up into a percentage of cover. We'll do purple moorgrass first.
This one here.
Yeah, that's purple moorgrass.
Yeah.
So we're looking for purple moorgrass, and purple moorgrass is generally an indicator of quite degraded peatlands. So it grows often on drained peatlands. So when you find it, you know that the bog's not as healthy as it should be.
And have we got some here?
We have got some here. We've probably got about 30%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's quite high. This is called tufted hairgrass, growing here. Looks quite pretty,
It's
blowing
lovely.
in the wind.
Beautiful. Mm.
But again, it's an indication of quite a degraded peatland, because it wouldn't grow on a normal, healthy bog.
No.
Now we're looking for sphagnum. And sometimes you have to look quite deep down through the rushes to find the sphagnum at the bottom, because sometimes it can be growing kind of within or underneath. Okay, Yep, so we've got a big patch of sphagnum here.
It's the Holy Grail, isn't
The
it?
Holy Grail, yes. And as you said, you get lots of different types. Some, again, are better to see than others. So this type that we're seeing here is called Sphagnum phallax, which, again, is quite a robust sphagnum, so it grows in all conditions and it can be dried out. So we've just found 5% sphagnum for the whole 10 metre quadrat, which is fairly low.
A long way to go, isn't
It is
it?
a long way to go. Considering we're on over a metre depth of peat, you would hope to find a lot more sphagnum. So hopefully in years to come, once the work's been done, then the sphagnum amount will go up, and more diverse sphagnum as well.
Yeah.
Would be really good.
Yeah. You've just been busy on a baseline survey here at Wasdale Beck, and that's going to form the basis of how you measure the improvement of the bog over the years to come.
Yes. It's very important in monitoring what's happening with the bog, and it's also important to see that any interventions that we put in, it's good to know if they're working or they're not working. And ultimately, if you don't monitor peatlands and monitor how things work, then it's difficult to make informed decisions in the future.
But Mel, you actually do a different sort of survey really when you start developing a kind of rescue plan.
Yeah, so we do lots of partnership working. So we'll work with lots of different landowners. So all our work isn't necessarily on Cumbria Wildlife Trust land. It could be working alongside United Utilities or Lowther, National Trust, a variety of different landowners. And what we'll do, we'll be given a site and we identify where the peat is likely to be, and we create a project. And initially this can be from the desk. So we'll use satellite photos and we'll identify where we think there'll be erosion features. So that includes things like hags and grips. And grips are just ditches that are dug through the peat to drain it, and bare peat. And we map it all onto a project using GIS. And then we transfer it onto a handheld mapper. And along with that information, we'll overlay a grid of 50 metre or 100 metre points where we'll come and we'll walk out onto the bog, and every 50 or 100 metres we'll take a peat depth and we'll look at the vegetation, and it gives us an overall idea of condition. And then once we've done that, we start to do a thing called ground truthing where we walk out to where we've seen a hag or a ditch on the satellite map. We walk and we find that point to see if it actually is, because sometimes it can be misleading. It might be a shadow or a change in vegetation. And if it is an erosion feature, so if it is a hag, we'll measure the height of it and how long it is, and we'll save it all. Then we can start building a restoration project.
So with all that information, then you create a plan.
Yeah, effectively we create a map. And on that map, they'll have all the different lengths of hags and the lengths of the grips and how deep they are and how we're going to approach it. Because ultimately, we want to re-wet the peat, spread the water out, make it nice and soggy. And then we can kind of price it all up, and then we put it out to tender. And then we use very specialist peatland contractors who have specially adapted diggers and lots of experience and lots of knowledge of working in the uplands and on bogs. And then between us, we kind of start working towards that restoration.
And is there any planting as well? Do you plant sphagnum as well?
We do sometimes. So if there's no obvious sphagnum there to re-establish, then we'll put in sphagnum plug plants, which is really good for peatlands because when you've got exposed bare peat, even if it's just been restored, it's starting to give off carbon dioxide. So you want that sphagnum to establish as quickly as possible. Yeah. So it's important that we do cover it in sphagnum as quickly as we can. So that does need plug plants sometimes.
Yeah. This doesn't happen just on our reserves. It happens really all over the county. So give me an impression of the scale of working on peatlands in Cumbria.
Well, it's pretty huge. It's pretty county-wide. In my first year at working as a peatland officer, it was all over Cumbria. So Eskdale, Matterdale, we went up as far as Spade Adam, and then down in the south, Grasmere, and then up at Ulscarf and around Thirlmere. So yeah, all over the county really.
Yeah, so I did my student placement with Cumbria Wildlife Trust, not last year but the year before, and I spent a lot of time working on the Haweswater project, which included Bampton Common, Mardale Common, sort of around the catchment of the Haweswater Reservoir, and those were huge sites. You know, you're trekking over the hills every day. Often we'll have walks 1 hour, 2 hour, maybe more sometimes to get to the site. You'll often get to the site and then actually to get to where you want to survey that day, you have to walk further. So, you know, it takes a lot of time and a lot of your energy. And it's a very physical job, but it's amazing to be outside and, you know, to exercise, to be around wildlife and plants. And yeah, I feel very lucky.
And Mel?
Mostly I feel lucky. Some days I feel less lucky. No, it's always great getting out, and I don't think I could do a 9 to 5 office job sat in front of a computer. I always feel much better when I've been outside doing something. Yeah, and it's lovely, and you see something different all the time. Yeah, it's good.
But as we were just walking up here, you were pointing out that it's not like just fell walking or hiking, is it? You're walking through vegetation. You have to really lift your legs, don't you? It's very tiring.
It is tiring. A lot of the time you might be on tracks or footpaths getting to the site, but once you're on the site you're not near any footpaths, so you're wading through a variety of vegetation, and that can be quite hard work. And especially if you're crossing a bog, you've got to kind of look where you're going and take care and not fall in. And some sites are harder than others. We've just been mapping Skidder, and that is covered in quite deep heather, so that was very hard going, much harder than a normal site, I would say.
Why is that?
It was probably about a metre and a bit deep, and even to walk 100 metres was quite tiring.
Do you find it a lonely job? Do you have to work out here on your own a lot?
We do a lot of lone working at the Trust, but I often find it's quite peaceful. I mean, some days you think you walk up to these places and you don't see a single person the entire time, but you know, other days lots of walkers, they come past, they see you with your peat probes and they say, oh, what are you doing? And you can talk to people and tell them about peatlands. So, you know, we do see people. Sometimes it's remote, but it's a nice place to work, and it's nice and quiet a lot of the time.
I suspect you actually don't have much time to do anything other than the job in hand, because there is so much to do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're constantly going one point to the next, one point to the next. You're looking at your mapper, looking straight forward. You get to the point, you do your peat depth, you do your vegetation, and you just go on. You know, we've got so many points to do and not always a lot of time to do them, so we just need to crack on and get it done.
Yeah, so no time for contemplation then.
Well, I mean, sometimes in a lunch break, have a sit and contemplate. We have some nice views for our lunch breaks, so that's always good.
And I guess it must be very satisfying too to think the work you're doing is contributing to restoring something as important as a peatland.
Yeah, it's really very satisfying, and it's nice to go back to sites that have been restored and see how they've changed, and even in a short amount of time. For example, Armboth, Cumbria Wildlife Trust worked on Armboth a few years ago, and now when you visit Armboth, especially in spring and summer, you get loads of dragonflies and frogs, and it's just beautiful to see. Yeah, that's really satisfying to see. Gives you a warm glow.
Absolutely.
Well, what a brilliant interview. And I think that really gives us an insight into what your peat team do on a day-to-day basis out there on the bogs themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge amount of work involved, and our peatland conservation officers are really dedicated in getting all that information in place and getting everything in place that these restorations can go as smoothly as possible and be as successful as possible.
Yeah. So, tell us a little bit, Susie, about the scale of the kind of things that CWT are doing in terms of peatland restoration.
Cumbria Wildlife Trust has had a sort of dedicated peatland team since 2013. And in 2013, we set up the Cumbria Peat Partnership, which is a partnership of lots of different organisations throughout Cumbria that have got some involvement in peatlands. But the peatland team in itself, at Cumbria Wildlife Trust, since 2013, we have surveyed over 12,000 hectares of peatlands in Cumbria, and over 5,000 hectares have undergone some level of restoration.
These peatland restoration techniques have come on, haven't they, over the years? And we've actually been at the forefront of pushing innovative ideas and innovative ways of doing these restorations, haven't they? Whether it's helicoptering stone up onto the fell or using the peat to block the grips. the whole restoration process has gone through an evolution, hasn't it? And we're at the forefront of that.
Yeah, you know, every peatland's different, and every peatland requires a different sort of take on it, and you have to be innovative to look at that peatland and decide what's best for it, and try and come up with the best approach. So yeah, absolutely, we've trialled new techniques, and we've got things that 10 years ago we weren't even thinking about doing, we now do on a regular basis.
Yeah. And just for our listeners to understand, a lot of what the peatland team do in terms of the actual restoration is marshalling plant and contractors, isn't it? This is big machine work. You know, we had 12 diggers out on Foulshaw Moss at the height of our peatland restoration project.
Yeah, so as much as we would like to carry out the restorations ourselves, it's just not possible. It would take a long time. So yes, we have huge diggers, so 9-ton diggers that go up onto sites with big wide tracks so that they cause minimal damage to the vegetation, and so that they don't sink into the bog. And they're specialist contractors who really know what they're doing, because it is a really specialist job, and they're hugely skilled at what they do. It's amazing to watch them moving the turfs and the peat around and sort of stretching them out, covering over bare peat. So the peatland conservation officers, through the restoration season, they go up there and they check on the contractors, they check that everything's going all right, and make slight adaptations if needed, and change things where needed, so that everything goes smoothly.
It is a very specialist thing, isn't it? Just taking those diggers on to such a difficult terrain. You know, we actually lost a digger in a pool here on Meathop Moss when we were doing the restoration there, and then that was a huge operation just to get the thing out again. You know, ruined digger. So, what about the scale? What in Cumbria, Susie? What's the scale of the problem?
Yeah, so the scale of the problem is huge, really. Most upland peatland is degraded in some way or another, and a lot of our fell tops in Cumbria are blanket bog. So we've got a long way to go yet, but we're hopeful that we'll get there, and that all the peatlands in Cumbria will be in a flourishing condition.
None of this is cheap, is it? Like getting all this plant up onto the fell sides is logistically nuts anyway, isn't it, for a start? But there's quite a lot of money in peat, because people are actually recognising the importance of keeping the carbon in the ground now in terms of climate change, aren't they? So where's the money coming from in terms of peatland restoration?
Yes, it's hugely expensive. At the minute, we're getting quite a lot of funding from DEFRA through their Nature for Climate Peatland Grant Scheme, which has funded a lot of our upland and also some of our lowland work in the last few years. We also get a lot of funding from charitable trusts and other organisations, as well as private individuals.
One last one, Susie. Have you got a favourite bog?
I'm not sure I've got a favourite bog, but I do like upland bogs that are really varied, and have got lots of little mires in between rocky knolls up on the uplands, and they've got some beautiful species in them. And if you just stop and look down at your feet when you're in a bog, you'll see so many wonderful things. Don't take in the big picture, because sometimes the big picture of bogs isn't that inspiring, apart from when there's lovely cotton grass heads waving in the wind. But if you look down at your feet, and you can see some of the really small, really interesting little insects and plants and all sorts of stuff that's just down below you.
I took my children to a bog one time in the middle of winter, and the information board actually said it's hard to be inspired by bogs. And my son's been quoting this back at me for years and years and years. Anyway, we're in the middle of summer, even if it is pouring with rain. Do try and get out and visit some of our beautiful, wonderful peatland reserves. Foulshaw Moss in the south of the county. The ospreys are fledged at the moment, and the chicks are flying around, so always a good one. Meathop Moss, a little bit quieter next door. Doesn't have quite the same volume of traffic. And for those in the north of the county, try visiting Drumbrough Moss, because it's a wonderful, wonderful place, and you get a real wilderness experience out in the middle of the bog there. As well as going out visiting peatlands, don't forget that Seafest is happening at St Bees on the 2nd of August, and that'll be a fantastic day out for all the family. Another one for your diary is the Members Conference. If you fancy meeting Cumbria Wildlife Trust staff and learning more about Cumbria Wildlife Trust, and that's early September. All the details of these events are available on our website at cumbriawildlifetrust.org.uk. So it just leaves me to thank Susie. Thank you so much, Susie, for coming along and explaining about our peatland work. Once again, thanks to Liz for doing this wonderful work of producing the podcast, and we'll speak to you all next month.